I just started the recording. I think we should probably get underway. People are giving us their valuable time, so take it away.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to our monthly webinar series. We are, let's see, here we go. All right, so again, welcome. Today we're going to talk about, and as you saw in the announcements, we're going to talk about Azure Arc and what that means for the SQL Server professional, the DBA. We'll get into the whys and whats here in a little bit, but that's our topic for today. Before we get started, what I want to do is let's jump right in, but let's want to spend a few minutes on who we are slides, and then we'll dive right in. So Randy Knight, I don't know if he's on. He will be speaking toward the end of this webinar. Randy founded. Are you there, Randy?
Absolutely.
All right, you want to introduce yourself, I guess?
Yep. Sure. So I'm Randy Knight. I'm a founder of SQL Solutions Group. We've been doing this at SSG for about 11 years almost. And I've been doing this for a time. I am Microsoft certified master, and we're excited to do these webinars. Azure Arc is pretty game changer for the hybrid. Excited to talk to you guys about it.
Awesome. All right, and then Randall will be taking a part in this toward the end. Let me introduce myself, and then we'll get into who SQL Solutions Group is. So I've been with SQL Solutions Group for just over a year. I've been doing SQL Server for a long time, probably over 30 years. There's a lot of noise in the background. Part of that 30 years is I spent probably 7-8 years at Microsoft. So as part of that 30 years, I was doing a lot of the cloud stuff. So SQL Server and the Azure Data Platform. So Azure SQL Database. I was one of the first SQL Azure MVPs. So I got started when it was, the biggest database was a gig, right? So that was really interesting. And I've written a number of books on SQL Server and Azure and things like that. So that's me. A little bit about the SQL Solutions Group. Randy likes to call us a boutique consultancy, which means, we've been doing this for, like Randy said, about 11 years. We have a number of clients around the United States in a number of verticals like financial, manufacturing, health, things like that. But, we offer not just consultancy, but, we offer remote DBA services. We do health checks. And we also offer SQL coaching because we're all about sharing the knowledge and helping you understand how to run your, how to make sure your SQL Server environments is supposed to be running well. So our job is to make sure that your environment's running well, it's performing the way it should, and help you understand how to do that, right? And so we love doing that, and so that's why we're in the business. So, all right, with that out of the way, let's jump right in. And this is the agenda today. So I get we're first going to talk about, let's define what hybrid cloud really means, because when we're talking about Azure Arc, we're really talking about hybrid cloud. So let's define what hybrid cloud really means. We'll do a quick definition and introduction to Azure Arc. We'll spend a little bit of time there, but not much. We'll talk about sort of the requirements you need to have in place to get Azure Arc running and in place. We'll do some demos. We'll take a look at Azure Arc, and then really we'll wrap this up by talking about what can you do with it? Why, how does it help me in my current environment and infrastructure, right? And I guess we should talk about, why are we talking about this? So, when we talk about Azure Arc and hybrid cloud, we're really, why are we doing this webinar? Why are we talking about this topic on today's webinar? You've probably seen a lot of, Ignite or, other conference sessions on Azure Arc. And there's a lot of content out there about that, but we decided to do a webinar on it because we are starting to see the benefit. We've seen the benefits of Azure Arc, but we're starting to see a lot of our clients and others who really could use the benefits of Azure Arc. So we have started using this within SSG with some of our clients. And we've kind of got on the bandwagon with Azure Arc, and it has really helped us in SSG. And we wanted to kind of share our learnings and ideas about what we have found with Azure Arc. So with that, that's why we're talking about this today. So we want to begin the discussion by talking about, hybrid cloud and what is hybrid cloud. So when we first, what we first wanted to do today is really establish a baseline understanding of what is a hybrid cloud. Ooh, got some feedback there. Today it's interesting. If you ask 10 people what a hybrid cloud is, you'll probably get, similar answers. But interestingly, not too long ago, if you were to ask that same question, ask 10 people that same question, you'd get almost 10 different answers. So the purpose of this discussion, let's define hybrid cloud as the follows. So what is hybrid cloud? And a hybrid cloud, for this purposes of this discussion, it really combines on-premises environment with the public cloud, which allows data to be shared between them, right? So you've got your on-premises environment, whether that's in a data center or within your business, and you have resources and services in a public cloud, whether that's Azure or AWS or Google or whatever, and you have a tunnel, a connection between those two, and those two on-premises and public clouds share data, right? This is essentially what we'll define as a public cloud. Now, there's also what we can call a multiple cloud or multi-cloud. This concept is where it's a configuration where organizations will use more than one public cloud that talk to the on-premise data center. We're not going to actually talk about that or focus on that today. Our focus is really going to be on the first scenario. We have an on-premises environment, and that is connected to Azure, right? Or in this case, Azure, but it's connected to a public cloud, right? Now, we, for a long time, Microsoft and their partners have been talking for years, a long time, about the benefits of the cloud. For example, you can leverage cloud computing and scalability when on-premises resources are being stretched. You can, there's the ability to avoid the necessity of provisioning new resources on premises. If I want to spin up a dev environment, I can do that very quickly, with a public cloud. One of the things that, even, Azure SQL database, or sorry, SQL Server has this capability called stretch database that allows you to stretch an on-premises SQL Server database to Azure, right? So you've got warm data on premises and your cold data in the cloud. That's hybrid cloud, right? So there's, very granular definitions, but essentially it's, I've got on premises, I'm combining that with a public cloud, and I'm sharing data between the two. That's public cloud. And all of this makes sense, but the reason we're talking about this is because what we see today and what a lot of you see today is that environments are getting bigger and more complex. As much as the cloud is taking off, our on-premises environments are still growing, becoming more complex. We've got now cloud environments that we have to integrate. And as these things grow and become more complex, it makes it more difficult to control and manage all of the different environments and infrastructure, right? More and more of these environments cross multiple data centers, they cross multiple clouds, and that each of those come with their own set of tools to manage and monitor these different environments, right? So this is where Azure Arc comes into play, right? This is, I think, the benefit of Azure Arc, and you've seen this, right? Azure Arc, it helps through simplifying management through a single, what Microsoft calls pane of glass, a single consistent platform for both your on-premises and cloud environments, right? And it allows you to run your services, whether you're on-premises or cloud environments, where they are, right? You can use Azure services regardless of where they run. And the four that we want to highlight today is servers. Azure Arc allows you to manage your Windows or Linux physical servers and virtual machines that are hosted outside of Azure on your network, and manage those within or another cloud environment or cloud provider in Azure, right? Through the single pane of glass. Kubernetes clusters, you can attach and configure Kubernetes clusters, whether those are located either inside or outside of Azure. Same thing, monitor through this single pane of glass. Azure Data Services, and this is really cool. I can run Azure Data Services on premises or at the edge or in a multi-cloud environment on the infrastructure of your choice. The key there is of your choice. If I want to, the benefits of Azure on premises, I can run them on premises. In another cloud environment, for example, that's really cool. And then SQL Server, you can manage your instance of SQL Server from Azure with SQL Server on Azure Arc enabled servers, and we'll actually show this, right? So these are kind of at a high level, the key benefits of Azure Arc. I can manage, monitor, maintain my on-premises environment through this single environment where I can, through the single pane of glass. I can also then, like it says, run those Azure Data Services on premises. Now, I think the key here is, you've heard this method of managing across your environments, like I've mentioned, through this single pane of glass, meaning I've got this single focal point, this single, we'll call it dashboard, for example, the single focal point for managing all my environments. And the way Microsoft does this is by projecting your existing non-Azure, on-premises, or other cloud resources into Azure Resource Manager. And we'll see this in the demo, which is super cool, right? Think about this. If you stop and think about what this means, I've got a consistent management, security, and government interface for all my servers across your environment, right? All of that. I can run Azure Data Services in any Kubernetes environment as if it were running in Azure, right? So think about running SQL Server managed instance on premises, right? And getting the same benefits. That's super cool, right? Think about the ability to configure and use Azure VMs extensions to use Azure Management Services to monitor and secure and update. If you need to roll out patches to all your servers, you can use Azure Arc to do all that, right? This is super cool, right? And so this is why, as we talked about, as our environments grow, as it become more complex, I don't need to go to, and I don't want to go to a bunch of different tools or interfaces to do all this. I can do this all within Azure, right? And I think that's awesome. And I think that's the benefit if we just kind of summarize, hey, what is this? It's great. Here's this single environment, allows me to monitor, manage, and maintain my entire environment, okay? All right. Let's talk. There's a couple scenarios that we're gonna talk about today. We'll focus on one today, and another one will have a follow-up webinar pretty soon to talk about the other environment. But with that introduction of Azure Arc really supports two basic scenarios, right? One is this: I have on-premises to Azure environment where I've got my on-premises connectivity or on-premise environment that is connected to Azure, and I've got data synchronizing between those two environments, right? That's what we're going to focus on today. The other scenario is this Azure PaaS on-premises. So we talked about that a little bit when we talked about this data services scenario, right? Where I can run Azure data services on premises, okay? the first scenario really says, I have on-premises things and I want to centrally manage and monitor those, right? And this includes addressing security issues. This includes addressing policies, patching and maintenance, inventory insight, which is kind of awesome, and a bunch more, right? I don't want to get too much into it here, but typically they say, don't give homework assignments in a webinar, but I'm going to give you really 2 homework assignments in this webinar, right? One is to go research this Azure service called Azure Lighthouse. And the reason being is imagine.
Yes, hello, my name is.
Imagine controlling your who can access your resources, who can access your resources, what they can access, and when they can access those, all in Azure, right? Bam, that's Azure Lighthouse. So your homework assignment is to go research and read up about that, right? The second scenario really says, I want the ability to run Azure PaaS services, not in Azure, but on premises. And this is what we were talking about earlier. For example, I want to run Azure SQL database or managed instance on premises. And the key here is I can do that with or without a direct Azure connection, right? That's kind of cool, right? How do I do it? I can run those and I don't have to have a direct Azure connection to do that. That is super cool, right? All right. If there's any questions, feel free to post those in the chat, and we'll get to those soon. But we'll want to kind of stop there for hopefully that's explains kind of Azure Arc. There's what I want to get into now, as we talked about it in the agenda, kind of, hey, what's the requirements for me for this to actually get started, right? I don't want to spend too much time here because I want to get into the demos and show you how to get started and how Azure Arc works. So, but what I want to do is talk about, in order to get Azure Arc working, what do you really need, right? And so, realistically, you need a virtual network with a virtual network gateway, and there's really 2 ways you can connect to that. One is site-to-site VPN, and was an express route. We really see site-to-site VPN kind of as standing out as the way to go. Most of our clients use a site-to-site VPN. The key differences here that I want to point out is that if you're going to use a site-to-site VPN, it uses an Azure VPN gateway. The traffic is sent through an encrypted tunnel over the internet. The Azure Express Route option, same thing, it's encrypted, but this connection is private. Your traffic does not go over the internet, right? So those are the 2 factors there. The Azure VPN gateway connects your on-premises networks to Azure through site-to-site VPNs, very much the way that if you've got a VPN client on your laptop or your desktop and you connect to your local office, it's kind of the same thing, right? So you do need a virtual network, and you do need to connect to whether through a site-to-site or express route. The other thing here is we want to talk about, and I think the ultimate point here is to synchronize user accounts and keep the ability to log in using your on-premise credentials, right? So there are obviously multiple ways to do that. One is kind of integrating Azure Active Directory with your on-premises Active Directory. That you can use Azure AD Connect, which is, you can use password hash synchronization or pass-through authentication. What's really cool is that a lot of our clients will use what's called seamless single sign-on. This is where users don't have to type in their passwords when they go sign into Azure AD. Basically, they don't even have to type in their usernames, right? This is really cool, right? So, but essentially it's, hey, how do we integrate and sync those 2? From a security point of view, you have the ability to use role-based access control, which provides granular access to Azure resources, who has access, what they can do, and the areas they have access to. Your second piece of homework assignment is to go look up Azure Sentinel. This is actually really cool. It is a security event environment that really what it does is it detects like threat detection. It does like alert detection, threat visibility, threat response, and a whole lot more, but something you should seriously look into when you're looking at like Azure Arc and some hybrid cloud scenarios. Okay. All right. Before I jump into the demo, hopefully that gives you a good foundation of what Azure Arc is. Jason, are there any questions so far?
Nope, nothing yet.
Awesome. Okay, so what I want to do is jump out and end, pause the demo for a second, right? And I want to open up, this is my Azure portal. And I'm going to do kind of begin it at the beginning and sort of walk through kind of what this is and how to get started. And there's, when we got into Azure Arc, there's so much to Azure Arc. There really is so much. And so we could literally spend, when Randy and I were actually talking about this, we thought, let's just do a single webinar on Azure Arc. And then we realized there's too much to fit into a single webinar, right? And so even in today's hour, there's a whole lot that we could cover. So I'm really just gonna, the goal is to go, hey, what is Azure Arc? How you can use it, how you can have this, single pane of glass monitoring, and how do you get started? So that's what I want to do. So what I did is I went and created a new resource group called Arc Demo. And what I did is I put everything in there, right? And so this is so super simple. I created it just a simple resource group. And I shouldn't say it's super simple. It did take a while to get my head around things and get things working. And that's what I want to walk you through today. But you'll notice here, I've got a lot of things that are related to Azure Arc, right? But also, notice I have a server that's, so in the room next to me is an actual physical Windows server, Windows Server 2019 running SQL Server 2019. And that's these two, right? So I've got a server that's Azure Arc enabled, and I've got a SQL Server that's Azure Arc enabled. I also have an Azure SQL Server and an Azure SQL database, right? And this is my single pane of glass. This is where I'm going to go and monitor and manage all of these information right here, right? And I want to show you how I added those at a high level, and then kind of what you can do with those once you've added those. Okay, so it's kind of really simple. So what I did is I went into and said I want to create a new resource, and I just said Azure Arc. That give me what I want, and I said, yeah, I want a let's do SQL Server. Let's do SQL Server Azure Arc. Oh my gosh, it's not going to give me Azure Arc. We'll do yeah, SQL Server Azure Arc. There it is. Right. And the cool thing about this is it's kind of a multiple step, but it's not that difficult. So what I did is I said create. And again, like we talked about, it does need you do need a few things. Obviously, you need the box or the virtual machine or physical box that you want to add to, you want to Azure Arc enable. You need a user account with permissions, and you need PowerShell. And I'll explain why you need PowerShell in a second, right? So, okay, great. I've got all of those things. I'm going to click next, and I'm going to select my subscription. I want to put it in this resource group. It's a Windows. If you have a proxy that you need to go through, then you need to put in the proxy information. Do you want to add any tags? No. Next, run the script. And this is where things get fun, right? What I did is what you need to do now is run this script on the physical box or the VM or whatever you're going to add or whatever you're going to Azure Arc enable, right? So I basically copied this, put it into Notepad or Notepad++, saved it as a PowerShell script, went over to my virtual machine and ran it. right? And you'll see here, it takes my subscription ID, it takes my name, the resource name, and the location. And it basically, what it does, it runs through and it downloads this utility, this agent, and installs this agent on the machine that creates that VPN or creates the connection. It doesn't really create the connection. It creates a communication between, and basically Azure Arc enables your machine and your SQL Server, right? And just with that, once that was done, we go back here. I don't want to create a resource group. I want to go back to my resource group. Once that was done, these two showed up in my resource group. Okay. And it literally took maybe 5 to 10 minutes at most. Okay. And that was super cool. So let me show you what you can now do with these boxes now that we've got their Azure Arc enabled. Okay. So notice again here, I've also got a log analytics workspace. We'll get to that in a minute. You have to do, I've got some Azure automation account. I'll tell you why you need that in a minute. And those are super simple to get started as well. But these are all important if you want to, for what I'm about to show you. Okay. Okay, so I want to start with the Azure Arc Server, and this is kind of fun. And the key here is right here, right? So one of the things you do need to do, and let me go back, because one of the things you do need is this log analytics workspace. And the log analytics workspace, it's anytime that you want to collect data and report on that data, you need a log analytics workspace, right? And this log analytics workspace is really simply an environment for Azure Monitor to log its data, right? So each workspace has its own data repository and configuration, but anytime you want to do and collect logs, and you plan on collecting data from an Azure resource in your subscription, you need a log analytics workspace, right? And the reason you need that is if we go into the server here, right? Couple cool things, right? Notice here, I can do update management. I can do monitoring insights. I can do logging. I can do change tracking and inventory. I can do logging, all sorts of, set up, like we talked about, set up policies of who has access to what and when. Security, continually monitor for security threats and vulnerabilities. And we're going to dive into some of these here right now, right? So monitoring insights, this is the one that said, hey, you need to enable a log analytics workspace, and you need to enable the automation, right? So before you use any of these, you need to turn on log analytics and automation. But it's so super cool because it's like, all right, I can, do resource group monitoring. There's Azure Monitor, but it basically says, hey, what is going on here? What are the insights? So if I just expand this node, for example, there's not a whole lot. Right, here's what's going on inside my machine, right? So I can get insights into the traffic that's going on. So if I can click into here, right? Here's connection details, links, requests per minute, response time on all these things over port 138, port 80, same thing, right? So super awesome. I love this because I can look to see what is going on this from my desktop on this physical server sitting in the room next to me, right? That is cool. Okay. And there's and it basically connects and gathers this stuff over a period of time, right? So I can say this is the last 30 minutes today, right? I can change that and say, hey, give me over an hour or whatever like that. I can change that. What I want, let me go back. So that's insights, update management. This is super cool because what I can do now is it says, hey, let's see. I'm failed update deployments. I haven't done any update managements, right? But I can say, what updates are there? Are there, on this machine? What updates are there? Is it missing any updates? Hey, I got a green check mark. It's ready to go. All my patches are applied, things like that. Right. Is there any missing updates? I can actually do a deployment schedule and say, hey, roll out these patches to this server or to these servers, at this time. Right. This is cool. I can do it right here from the Azure portal. Okay. And then let me go back and do change tracking and inventory. I may not have enabled this, but yeah, so change tracking. So I do need to, it's thinking about that because the same thing, it tells me, I have to go turn on change tracking in my automation account, right? But it's the same thing. I can turn on change tracking to say, what has changed in my environment over this period of time, right? And all this through this one interface, okay? That is awesome. I love that. Okay, so this is my virtual machine. Let's see, are there logs? Oh, and the one I want to show you here is, if I go to, where'd it go? Oh, let's see. 1 minute. Oh, yeah, it's not yet. Okay. Yeah, so let's see. Extensions. I do want to click on extensions. So these extensions, this is cool, right? These extensions are what allows me to provide this capability of monitoring and security and updates. So anytime that you need to do any of these capabilities, just click add, and there's all these different, a bunch of different extensions to add, right? But you'll notice that I've got the ability to, there's my Microsoft monitoring agent. That's super cool. There's the Windows for SQL Server, so it can monitor that. That's super cool, right? And all this only took me a few minutes to set up. All right. What I wanted to go back now is talk about the log analytics workspace, right? Because there's some cool stuff here. So I'm going to go into my resource group and go into my log analytics workspace, right? And this will come up in a second. There it is. All right. So this is my log analytics workspace, and it says, hey, I can get started with log analytics. I can maximize my log analytics experience. I want to focus on this area for a few minutes, right? Because what allows me to do is connect to a data source, configure monitoring solutions, and then monitor the overall health of my Azure Arc enabled resources. Okay. And so if here I can say, well, let me select one or more data sources. So I'm going to click on Windows and Linux Agents Management. And what it's going to do is it says, hey, you've got one computer's connected to this. Obviously, I only have that one. This is an interesting one, right? Because in order for me to start connecting these logs and start gathering data, I had to do a couple things. And the first thing I needed to do was install, it's called the Microsoft, the MMA, Microsoft Management Agent, right? When I ran this script, it did not install the MMA. This is a completely different agent that does the data collection and the monitoring and data gathering off the box, right? So you'll notice that when you create the workspace, you get a workspace ID and a key, okay? What you then need to do is go over, basically I had, in this scenario, I had to download the agent. I copied the workspace ID and the private key basically to a text file, save those to a thumb drive, walk over to, to the room next door and install the agent. And when you get that, it installs this Microsoft Monitoring Agent properties, installs the agent. You have to put in your the workspace ID and the key, and then register that. And then you get this nice, it starts collecting data. So you know that, hey, it's the agent has successfully connected and it's starting to gather data, right? So before you do any data collection, right? I mentioned earlier that if you want to do any data collection from any of your Azure resources or any Arc-enabled resources, you have to install this Microsoft monitoring agent on the on-premises resources that you want to monitor, right? Or that you want to Arc-enable, okay? So I did that, and then once I did that, and it started gathering data, then this showed up, right? One Windows computer connected, and now it's starting to gather logs, right? And starting to gather what is going on this box, okay? So I go and I say, well, let me go to the logs, and it opens this nice agents management blade, where I can actually start running queries to go, what is going on this box? I think if I were to be completely honest, it's not T-SQL. It's basically it's the KQL language. So it's not that difficult to learn, but there is some nuances in the syntax. But it's actually pretty powerful, right? So by default, it'll run this and say, hey, what's going on? There's a heartbeat, right? So it tracks, I got direct agent, the Windows, so it's running Windows Server 2019, all this good information. I can actually write different queries and run them here. There are built-in queries, like if I want to look at, hey, audit information, there's a query there. If I want to look at Azure Monitor or other containers, databases, I can say average CPU resources, so I can run that, for example. No results, and I'll tell you why that's not, I have no results found in a second, right? But this allows me to say, hey, there's all this great information, built-in queries to go see and query what is going on in your, on this particular box that you've gathered, right? That you Azure Arc enabled. So this is super cool, right? So this is what the Azure Log Analytics gives you, is this ability to collect through Azure Monitoring and collect logs and data from all your information. And now through this, I hate to keep saying the word single pane of glass, but from the Azure portal, really, I can monitor all my resources, whether they're on premises or in Azure. Okay. Let's see, I'm gonna look at my notes for my demo. Did I miss anything? Okay, and lastly, let me jump into here. So what I wanted, let's see, yeah, I don't care about those. So I'm gonna go back into my resource group. So the way I did this is, the first thing you want to do is, if you want to monitor your SQL box, it's really your SQL Server on-premises SQL instance. It's really a two-step process, right? You have to, first of all, Arc enable the server, and then you need to Arc enable the actual SQL Server. Now, two things. I kind of did it I don't want to call it the hard way. I just said, like I showed you in the demo, I said, create a resource, SQL Server, Azure Arc, right? And it gave me that script. That script will do both, right? It will do, in fact, if you look at this script, it will actually do both. It will Arc enable the server first, and then you'll need to run it again to Arc enable your SQL Server. You really ought to just, the right way to do it is just Arc enable, get a script for your server, and then get a script for your SQL Server, I think. Because the script for your SQL Server will first look and say, hey, is this server not Arc enabled, or is your server Arc enabled? Yes or no. If it's not, it'll Arc enable your server, then you need to run it again for your SQL Server, right? So that's the key. Now, one of the caveats is that, and there's some documentation online for this. There are some, and this is what I wanted to point out, in your subscription. If you go to your subscription and you go to resource providers, there are some resource providers that you need to register before, in order for you to run this script, right? One is this hybrid compute and change analysis. There's another one, I think it is, shoot. Where'd it go? Might be Insights. It's one of these. Anyway, oh, and guest configuration. So it'll tell you if you run the script and it errors, it'll actually tell you, hey, this resource provider is not enabled. You need to go into here and enable it. The reason I point this out is because the documentation says, hey, there's 2 you need to enable. It doesn't tell you about the third, right? So if you run the script and it errors, read the error message. It'll say, hey, you need to go enable this third resource provider. Go register that. It's simply, you click on it here and, for example, and just say register, right? And it'll register it. Give it a minute or 2 to register. Then go rerun the script. Everything's fine, right? And that's just I want to say fault. It's just it's not listed in the documentation. Okay. All right. Now, the other cool thing about this is that this is super awesome. We've focused primarily in this webinar about, you know, the server itself, but the other cool thing is you can get the same kind of insight into your SQL Server. And so I'm just going to show you real quick. Where's it at? SQL Server, Azure Arc, right? You don't have the same list, you know, same options in the navigation pane over here, but you do have the ability to go, hey, again, monitor for security vulnerabilities and things like that. But you do get this thing called environment health, and this environment health, it's basically does, we'll call it a high-level health check of your SQL Server, right? And so if you click on this, it'll basically say, hey, this is so cool. Oh, look, it's maybe it just took a while, right? So I'm going to turn the time over to, well, actually, I'm going to see if I can, no, I'm going to turn the time over to Randy here in a second, because this takes a minute to, and I don't say a minute, this takes a little bit to, I'll call synchronize, because even early, you know, when I set this up, it told me for a long time, hey, you know, the Microsoft Management Agent is not enabled or installed in the subscription. I'm like, yes, it is. And so I think what it is this takes a long time. So if you do it right and you still get this message, give it a little bit of time, because I think it has to do some synchronization, right? But you do need to, and that's that MMA that we basically downloaded, got the key and installed on the physical box that we had to, right, copy the thumb drive, walk it over. That's that piece, right? Once you got this and the extension is there, you're basically going, hey, I now want to run and do a SQL assessment, right? And it basically gives you a script to walk over and run that script on the box to do a SQL assessment. And then what it does is it basically just keeps doing an assessment every so often. I think it's every 7 days, but it'll basically just do a health check, every kind of high level health check every so often, right? I haven't got this done. I'm going to turn the time over to Randy here in a minute to do that. But this is what we're doing, right? This is the cool, this to me is the bee's knees of this, right? Because, you know, now I can have this one interface where I can go look and say, here's what's going on in my SQL Server environment for all my SQL Server instances. Super cool. Okay. But you have to do that.
Okay? All right. Hey, thanks, Scott. But no, we've been doing some things in our own kind of dog fooding this in our own environment, our SSG internal resources. And so, you know, we thought showing you, you know, it's kind of the cooking show, right? That this is how you set this all up. But a lot of these Azure things do take time. So like that SQL Server health check assessment is designed to run once a week. And so it's best practices, right? This is not monitoring or alerting, right? But it's going to update like once a week. And it's just going to, the way all of this stuff works, like Scott said, is log analytics, right? That it's uploading data to log analytics. And then this assessment is running and kind of giving you a dashboard. So I thought what I would do is just show you some of this stuff in our own admittedly small environment, right? That from a standpoint of you know, just like one production server and whatnot. But we're, you know, one of the things we're doing is we're getting ready to pilot doing, you know, some of this as a proof of concept with a customer or two. So over time, you know, we're going to have some really good kind of real world data to talk about. So let me share my screen. And I'm also going to caveat today because I am not in the office. I'm traveling, and my internet connection is just 4G hotspot. So far, it's been okay, but it does cut out here and there. So hopefully, hopefully this will work out. So I'm going to share my screen, get out of all this stuff, and just get to a browser and go to my Azure Arc. And so if we look at servers that we have onboarded, we have a few different things across some, you know, there's this Arc demo one that Scott was just looking at. But we've even got like our domain controller set up with that as an Azure Arc. There's one of the domain controllers that's on premise. The other two are VMs already. There's this, you know, Lab 2019A is a SQL Server. Right, so if we go look at that, we see all those things that we were talking about. But if we go to update management, I believe this one is already enabled. Let's see, update management. Of course, now my internet is starting to have issues because I'm presenting. That's kind of how this works, right? Yeah. So like take change tracking, for example. That's one of the built-in solutions with Arc for servers. This isn't SQL specific, but this is going to do things like tell you, you know, configuration changes. You know, managing configuration management for servers is one of the things that is important, right? So, oh, and it looks like it finally switched over to update management. So this is telling us, hey, you've got you're okay on critical updates, but you're missing a security update. Here's others, right? And like Scott said, we can orchestrate all of our patching this way. And so the idea here, you know, if you have a mature enterprise infrastructure, right, where you're doing all this stuff on premise, you're using, you know, Windows Server update services or System Center Configuration Manager, that's great. And we're not saying don't do that. But what we find is that there's a lot of, you know, small to mid-sized shops that patching orchestration is one of those things that's, you know, on the roadmap. And so consequently, things aren't being patched. And so this is a way to plug into the Azure services for managing a lot of that kind of stuff, change tracking, inventory, you know, configuration management, desired state configuration, all those things that you want to do to manage your environment. And Microsoft has done all the work, right? So, and it's reasonable. I don't believe Arc, there's any pricing for Arc right now. You pay for the services that you use, which is primarily going to be log analytics. As you're, you know, ingesting data into log analytics using storage, there's some fees associated with that. But like we've done some that we have like a dozen servers uploading data, and it's like, you know, less than $100 a month. So these are the inexpensive Azure resources, right? Just kind of using these infrastructure resources to be able to do that. So that was the update management. Looking at the inventory, again, we can see all the software that's installed on the server. We can see all of the services, what their status is, you know, and what's interesting about this, so Scott was using that server, that's a physical server that's in his home office. He's not on a site-to-site VPN, you know, that's just uploading this data to Azure over the public internet using SSL, TLS, right? It is secure, but you can use a private endpoint for that too, if you like, you know, if you have a site-to-site VPN set up. private connectivity to Azure. But the point is, here I am, and you could think of this if Scott was one of our customers, right? I don't have to get on a VPN. I don't have to get into their environment to kind of see what's going on. And the same thing for you, you know, whether it's an Azure VM or an on-premise VM, you can manage it the same way. Change tracking we started to look at, you know, that's the one that it will actually tell me configuration changes. And, you know, a lot of these are going to be, you know, a service was started or stopped, right? So everything that changes, you know, it will tell you, right? So this service was running and it stopped. Was stopped, now it's running, right? So it gives me a lot of good information. If we go to the insights, you know, the map is the same as what you looked at, but we have some data that's been collected over time for this one, right? So if we go to log analytics, you know, we can see all kinds of different things that have been going on there. Let's take a look at a different server. I'm going to go just to a log analytics workspace now. This is actually a SQL Server VM in Azure, which is why it's not in Azure Arc, but we're using these same resources, you know, that you use for your on-premise. So if I go look at this and I go down to my solutions, you know, the SQL assessment was one of the solutions that Scott mentioned, right? So we have this SQL health check, right? And there's 2 servers that we're collecting data from. And if I go to that dashboard, again, you know, this is not the end all be all. There are things that we would do differently if we were building this, but it's a nice kind of best practices check, right? So we can see we have, you know, one high priority recommendation, which is transaction log backups. It's saying, hey, you got a user database that's in full mode that is not being backed up. That's a big problem, right? You know, looking at the servers that we have here. And one of the things that's really cool about it is at any point in here, if you go click on logs, it's going to take you to your log analytics and you can run some queries. And I think over time, in terms of content with our blog and our webinars and things like that, we're going to do more and more with log analytics and Azure Monitor, because this brings a lot of just that you just don't necessarily get on premise by yourself without investing a lot of time and money. So, you know, I'm personally of the opinion that the hybrid cloud and leveraging some of these Azure services that are, you know, quite inexpensive to unify your environment so that you can manage it, you know, multi-cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, or on-premise, is going to be a big trend over the next year or two. You know, another thing that is pretty cool that's out there, this is totally a tangent, but we got a few minutes. If you've worked with Terraform at all, there's a company called HashiCorp that has created a tool called Terraform. But basically, it's infrastructure as code. So like an Azure ARM template or the AWS equivalent, but it abstracts APIs. So you could have a Terraform script, let's call it, that you could deploy infrastructure, deploy services to Azure, AWS, vSphere on-premise using the same script, right? So I think we're going to see more and more of that trend. And what I see, the on-site data services are cool. And we're actually pretty excited to start playing with that and doing some webinars on running Azure SQL DB, Azure Functions, managed instance on-premise. But to me, the big game changer on this stuff is going to be being able to leverage these tools, these solutions, update management, inventory, just log analytics. Some of the stuff that you can do. And I wish we had time to really dig into log analytics because it's KQL is customer query language, and it was designed as a kind of an analytics language, and so it has visualizations built right into it, right? So you run a query and you say, hey, I want to see this as a chart, right? And so over time, hopefully we'll be doing more and more, just kind of showing how you can do that. And we'll do it in the context of on-premise servers, not because you can do the same things with Azure VMs, but that's kind of obvious, right? And what we see in our customer base is lots and lots of on-premise still, with some hybrid. And, you know, we have a few customers that are committed to a 100% cloud migration, but that takes time, right? That doesn't happen overnight. So you're going to have a hybrid cloud at some point, unless you're a startup that you know, just did everything in Azure from the get-go. So that's what we wanted to show you, just, you know, some of that data that has, you know, kind of real stuff. Hopefully this was valuable. I'll turn it back over to Scott to wrap things up. And if there's any questions, we've got a couple minutes, and, you know, we can go over if we need to. So,
thank you. All right. Let me, I think I need to share my screen. And anyway, let's just wrap up real quick. I think we got 2 minutes. Let me,
actually, I have a direct message question.
Sure.
But I thought I would go ahead and cover that. The question is, can you pull in performance information like weight stats? And the answer is yes. And that's some of the secret sauce that we're working on behind the scenes for our managed service customers and things like that, is starting to do that. So log analytics by default, you know, any logs that are on the server, Windows logs, IIS logs, there's built-in stuff for that. Perf mon counters, there's built-in stuff for that. But you can also define your own tables, your own, you know, really, you can store anything in log analytics. So absolutely, the ability to collect weight stats, you know, X often and upload that to log analytics, that's huge, right? And so that's one of the things we're excited about, is starting to build some things like that over time, right? And at least, you know, giving our customers the option. Now, you know, there's an entire security discussion around the hybrid cloud and around, you know, uploading data, cloud, you know, data from your machine to a third party and things like that. So it's certainly not something we're going to force on people, but it's a great option. So were there any other questions? Jason, I'm
Not seeing any at this point, but yeah, if anybody wants to chime in.
So great question, Don. So, you know, the SQL environment health check is great. You know, just adding the perfmon stuff and pulling all that in and starting to build some log analytics alerts and things is great. But definitely one of the things we want to do is start pulling in things from DMVs, right? And, you know, pushing that up to log analytics for analysis. So.
All right. Actually, so all right, we need to wrap up. So
Scott has a meeting, so
yeah,
I'll hang around for a minute or two if there are any other questions. Otherwise, everyone have a fantastic rest of your week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
We'll be sharing the video from this by email in the morning, and we're looking forward in November we're going to put together we're thinking of doing a past summit focused recap webinar just before Thanksgiving. So we'll be letting you know about that as soon as we have that assembled. And then, as mentioned, during this webinar, we're planning a part 2 for Azure Arc. Lots more to cover, so we look forward to sharing those details with you soon as well.